Welcome to Law Talk Today, a series devoted to bringing you informative and educational programs focused on issues of law, government, and community. Hello, and welcome to Law Talk Today. I'm Dan Agatino, your host. Joining us in studio today is attorney Susan Carlson. Susan, thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you, Dan, for having me.
So I wanted to talk with you today about real estate. Everybody knows the market's been on a roller coaster for a couple years now, and there's some people who are thinking about buying a house, that it might be a good time. Other people are cautioning against it. So I thought maybe we could have a conversation to get some insights from the legal perspective.
Sure.
What do you think is the first thing someone who's thinking about buying a house ought to do?
I think the first thing they need to do, Dan, is actually sit down one evening with their spouse, if they're married, or their significant other, and go over their finances, because the house is your single biggest purchase probably that most people make in a lifetime. And if you're not real familiar with your monthly expenses, and I do mean very familiar, not just, oh, I think I pay $100 here, $200 there, you want to pretty much down to the
That's
penny.
what happens all the time, isn't it? You're romantic about your budget to say, well, I only spend so much, you know.
That's correct.
And you could be spending triple that amount.
Absolutely. So they need to sit down, look at their budget, see what they can afford on a home, and get an idea, you know, based upon what their current circumstances are now. For example, if they're renting, and they're renting at $1,500 a month, is that a comfortable amount they're looking for in a mortgage payment or not? Or can they go a little bit higher? And if they can go higher, how much higher? And then they need to look at their savings and see what they have in a savings account, how much money can they put down, because unlike years ago where you used to put 20% down, now in today's market you only need to put down 3% and you can get what's called an FHA loan.
When I was shopping for a house, I remember the realtor was trying to convince me that I could buy a house that was maybe $100,000 more than I felt comfortable buying. How do you make the determination as a buyer, well, this is my ceiling, I can't really go higher than that?
What I think you need to do, again, it all starts with the finances. You look to see what you can afford, and in today's world with the internet, there's so many useful tools out there. If you go on most of your real estate websites, they'll actually have a mortgage calculator on there. So what you can do is you can put in what you think you can afford as a mortgage. You know, the median house probably today for a first-time home buyer runs in the neighborhood of right around $200,000 to $250,000. And you put that in, and then what you do is you put down what your mortgage amount is. So, for example, if you're buying a house for $250,000 and you can put 10% down, that's $25,000. So you'd put in your mortgage calculator $225,000. Figure out what the standard interest rate is. Today it's right around the 5%, and they allow you to put that in, and it will calculate what your principal and interest payment is. But bear in mind that when you do look at that, that doesn't include your taxes or your homeowner's insurance. So as the future home buyer, you need to be a little bit diligent and try to find at least what the average cost of the taxes are per year in the particular area you're looking for. And whatever the yearly taxes are, divide that by 12 and add that on to what your principal and interest is. And that'll give you a rough idea what your mortgage payment is going to be.
Some people got into trouble because they saw these really attractive interest rates. And the interest rate is actually only for a limited period of time, and then it gets adjusted.
That's correct. Back in 2003, 2004, the big loan was what they called a cozy loan, which was what they call a negative amortization loan, which means instead of paying, if your interest rate is 5%, you would only pay 2% interest, and the other 3% would be tacked on to the end of your loan. So instead of seeing your principal decrease, your principal actually increased. And then after the period of time, which was normally 3 years, you went from that 2% to 5%, and that almost doubled your mortgage payment. And a lot of people didn't realize it, didn't keep track, or thought that they would be able to afford it because as the house prices were going up, they thought their salaries would adjust accordingly, and they didn't.
And if it went from 2% to 5%, you were lucky. There were times it went from 2% to much higher. Isn't that true?
Oh, absolutely. Most of them had an interest rate where it went from a specific amount, and if you bought in, let's say, at about the 6%, which was the standard in the industry at that time, it could never fall less than 2% your adjustable rate, but it could be capped out at 11. And what would happen is it would adjust every so often, but you could actually have a maximum interest rate of 11% on some of those loans.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but can you give us an idea? If I have a mortgage that's, we'll use easy numbers, $1,000 a month, and it's at 5%. How much do you think I'd be paying if that went from 5% to 11%? In other words, if I had $1,000 a month at 5%, how much more would I be paying if it actually went up the way we're talking?
Approximately double. So you'd be approximately paying $2,000 because you're paying on the interest rate, correct?
So people got in a lot of trouble.
Right, your interest has doubled.
So we have a conversation and then a very detailed and painfully honest budget. This is what I spend when I go to the movies and going out to dinner, and I say, this is what I can afford. Right now, maybe I pay rent in the amount of $900, $1,200, and I could probably cut back and afford $1,800, $2,200 a month for a mortgage. Now what do I do?
Then what you need to do is you need to pick a realtor. And I think your realtor is your key to finding the home within your budget. And you should let your realtor know what you're looking for, because most realtors have financial advisors that they're working with, somebody maybe in-house or a mortgage or a bank that they refer their clients out to for loans. And tell them, I'm looking for a house, I really can't afford more than $2,000 a month principal, interest, and taxes. What do you have available? Here's the areas I'm looking at, and can I buy a house in this area? And if you get a very good realtor who knows the area, they'll be able to tell you what your median range of the house is, whether it be $200,000 to $225,000, or if you can spend more, $300,000 to $325,000, whatever the case may be.
Right.
And then you give them some particulars, what you're looking for in a house, obviously, the bedrooms, the bathrooms, how new you want things to be, do you mind putting work in, those type of issues.
So just getting to some of the legal aspects of this, when you have a relationship with a realtor, say I go to the local real estate agency, I ask if they could show me some houses. Am I in a contract with them? Do I have to stick with them, or can I go to another realtor if I feel uncomfortable?
No, normally what happens is if you're the buyer, you're not under a contract with any realtor. What you do is you just walk in, you tell them, I'm looking for a house, I want to look here, I want to look in this price range, and they'll try to find you some houses that meet your guidelines and take you out and show you the house. But if you get a realtor, sometimes it may be a little overly aggressive where you say, listen, I don't want anything above $250,000. And they're like, well, you know what, let me show you some $275,000, because you can always put in a contract price for the $250,000, and you feel uncomfortable, you either let them know, and if they still, don't work with you right, you can free to go to any other realtor in and around the area. The only person who's under contract is the seller because they sign a listing agreement.
Okay, so I find a realtor and I go out looking for houses. And just from a lawyer's point of view, is there anything I have to avoid, maybe in my conversations with sellers or in paperwork that I might be presented with?
I think there's a couple things you need to think about and either avoid or gravitate to, especially in this market. First of all, if you're a prospective home buyer in this market and you want to buy a house, let's say we're here in the middle of May as we're taping this, but you want to be in the house for the beginning of the school year because you have school-age children, you're roughly 3 months out. Probably something you want to be cautious about is what's called a foreclosure property, whether it's in foreclosure now, pre-foreclosure status, because what's going to happen is most of those that are being sold on what's called a short sale, because they are in foreclosure, it's where the bank accepts less money than owed on the house, those can take anywhere probably from 6 to 9 months average. So you need to know what you're looking for. Now, if you're a person who's a prospective buyer who has no time limits, that might be the best route to go now because you can get some good deals out there if you don't mind waiting.
Well, let me ask you about those deals. Let's say that I find a house that I love, it's in my price range, it's under what used to be market value because it's a foreclosure, and I start the process. Is it ever possible that I think I'm going to be buying this house in foreclosure and the person who's being foreclosed upon has some court action or comes up with some money and they take their house back and I'm left without the house?
That's a possibility. But usually what you'll see is your realtor will tell you it's subject to what they call third-party approval or lender approval. That usually means that 9 out of 10 times the seller's just looking to get out so that the house is not foreclosed upon.
Okay.
And in those cases, the likelihood of the seller coming back in and buying the house are probably minimal at best. If you're actually buying a house